2 years ago, my net worth crossed $1.2 million. And in the 2 years since, I have changed almost nothing about how I actually live. Same car, same apartment, same grocery list, same 3-year-old jacket I'm wearing in half my videos. People assume that crossing a number like that changes your habits, that it's supposed to feel like a door swinging open into a different kind of life. For me, and for the vast majority of people who actually get there the slow way rather than the lucky way, it's the reverse. The habits are what got you the number in the first place. And the moment you start dropping them is usually the moment the number stops growing, or worse, starts quietly shrinking while you're not paying attention. According to Ramsey Solutions' National Study of Millionaires, one of the largest and most detailed studies of its kind, surveying more than 10,000 American millionaires across every state, somewhere between 8 and 9 in 10 of them are self-made, not inherited, not a lottery ticket, not a single lucky trade. Built, slowly, mostly by people who never once felt rich while they were doing it, and who, according to the same research, mostly don't feel dramatically different now either. 94% of them say they live below their means. That statistic isn't describing what they did before they had money, back when it was a necessity. It's describing what they still do, on purpose, on a Tuesday, with money they could easily spend without consequence. I think that's the part almost nobody talks about honestly. The habits weren't a phase. They weren't scaffolding you tear down once the building is finished. For the people who actually keep the wealth they build, rather than the ones who spike and quietly deflate a few years later, the habits are the building itself, load-bearing, not decorative. I should say plainly that I'm not naming my exact number to brag, and I recognize how that framing can land badly if I'm not careful about it. I'm naming it because vague, unspecific advice about living below your means almost nothing until it's attached to an actual figure and an actual life. And I'd rather be specific and slightly uncomfortable than safely vague and useless to whoever's actually watching this, trying to figure out what to do differently starting today. So here are the 15 habits I refuse to let go of, why the data says almost every self-made millionaire keeps them too, and which ones you can realistically start today, regardless of what your current number looks like. Habit 1. I still read the price before I decide if I actually want something, not after I've already decided emotionally, and I'm just looking for permission. It sounds small, almost silly, the kind of thing you'd expect someone to abandon the moment money stopped being tight, and every purchase stopped mattering individually. But it's the exact habit that separates decisive spending from emotional spending. Ramsey's study found that 93% of millionaires use coupons and actively compare prices before buying, even on purchases that would barely register against their overall net worth. That's not about needing to save the money anymore. It's about never letting the decision happen automatically on autopilot, just because the number in the account makes it technically possible. Habit 2. I still drive a used car, and I plan to for a long time, possibly indefinitely. 61% of millionaires in the Ramsey study drive vehicles worth less than $35,000, and separate research puts the share who specifically buy used rather than new at 55%. Cars lose roughly 60% of their original value in the first 5 years alone, which means someone is absorbing that depreciation every single time a car changes hands. Letting someone else absorb it isn't a sacrifice on my part. It's just math I refuse to voluntarily opt out of, no matter what the dealership finance manager suggests I can now afford. Habit 3. My vacations still have a ceiling, and I set it on purpose before I start looking at flights, not after I've already fallen in love with somewhere I can't quite justify. Tom Corley's 5-year Rich Habits study, which tracked 233 individuals, including 177 self-made millionaires, found that 96% spent less than $6,000 a year on vacations combined, and 41% spent less than $3,000. I still plan trips around value and actual experience rather than status or how they'll look online, and I've genuinely never once regretted a trip afterward for being too modest. Habit 4. I don't gamble, in any form, including the ones that don't feel like gambling because they've been redesigned to look like entertainment, or even investing. Corley's data found 84% of the millionaires in his study never gamble at all. I'd extend that principle to anything structured mathematically to make the house win over time, including some of what passes for investing advice in certain corners of the internet right now. If the odds are built against me by design, on a timeline the house controls, I'm not interested, no matter how the app frames it or how many people in the comments say they hit it big last month. Habit 5. My investing is automated, and it happens the day my paycheck lands, before I ever see the money sitting available in checking. Research from Vanguard and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau found that automation increases long-term savings rates by more than 40% because it removes the moment of willpower entirely from the equation. I don't decide to invest every single month, weighing it against everything else that money could technically do instead. I decided once, years ago, sitting at my kitchen table, and the decision still runs quietly in the background, without me having to relitigate it every payday. Habit 6. I still wake up several hours before my day officially starts, most mornings, even when nothing on the calendar technically requires it. Corley's research found that nearly half of self-made millionaires wake up at least 3 hours before their workday begins. I'm not going to pretend this is some productivity hack dressed up as a moral virtue. It's quieter than that. It's the only stretch of the day nobody else has a claim on yet, before the messages start and the requests pile up. And I protect it the same way I'd protect any other asset that only exists if I actually show up for it. Habit 7. I track my net worth on a fixed schedule, the first of every month, not just when I'm feeling anxious about money and need the reassurance or the wake-up call. The habit isn't really about the number itself, which moves around for reasons that have nothing to do with my actual behavior some months. It's about treating financial awareness as a routine input, like checking the weather, rather than an emergency response reserved for when something already feels wrong. Every time I update it, whether it moved up or moved down that particular month, I'm reinforcing the same identity, someone who actually looks on schedule, regardless of what the number says back. Habit 8. I still live somewhere I'd honestly call modest for my income, and that was a deliberate choice, not a default I forgot to update. 64% of the millionaires in Corley's study described their own homes that way, in their own words, and 56% had owned the same home for at least 20 years. I'm not there yet on the 20-year mark, but the underlying logic already makes complete sense to me. A home that costs meaningfully less than I could technically qualify for leaves more of every future raise available to actually build wealth, instead of quietly absorbing it into a bigger mortgage payment that resets my baseline every time my income moves. Habit 9. I still avoid high-interest debt as close to entirely as I can realistically manage. This isn't about avoiding all debt on some kind of principle, and I want to be clear that this isn't a purity test I hold anyone else to. Mortgages and reasonable business financing serve a genuine purpose, and I use both without hesitation when the math supports it. It's specifically the high-interest, consumption-driven kind, the kind that finances a depreciating lifestyle instead of an appreciating asset, that I've never let back into my life once I finally got it out years ago. After learning that lesson, the expensive way, like most people do. Habit 10. I read more than I watch, especially when it comes to how money and markets actually behave over long periods of time, rather than in the last 24 hours of noisy headlines. Research summarized in the Millionaire Next Door found that wealthy individuals consistently spend more time reading investment material than watching financial news or entertainment built around it. For clicks and engagement, there's a real structural difference between content built to genuinely inform a decision you'll actually make and content built purely to hold your attention for the next 6 minutes, regardless of whether it helps you at all. I still notice, deliberately, which one I'm consuming in any given moment, and I still choose the slower, less exciting one on purpose, most of the time. Habit 11. I still work hard, on purpose. Well past the point where it would be easy to quietly coast on what's already built, Corley's data found that 73% of the millionaires in his study worked an average of 58 hours a week. I don't repeat that number as a badge of honor. And I want to be careful here, because rest genuinely matters. And burnout is real, and I've experienced both. But I've noticed, honestly, that the version of relaxing that actually feels good to me still tends to involve building or making something, not avoiding everything productive entirely. Habit 12. I still wait before big purchases, using a simple non-negotiable rule I've kept for years now. 72 hours, no exceptions made for excitement or urgency, on anything that isn't a genuine, verifiable emergency. Most impulse spending, in my own repeated experience testing this on myself, simply does not survive 3 full days of actually sitting with the decision, instead of acting immediately on the initial spike of wanting it. The purchases that do survive that window tend to be the ones I never regret later, which tells me the rule is doing precisely what it's supposed to do, quietly, in the background, without requiring constant willpower, in the moment of temptation itself. Habit 13. I still buy fewer, better things instead of accumulating cheap ones that need constant, ongoing replacing every single season. The self-made millionaires interviewed across multiple independent studies consistently describe this exact same instinct, almost word for word, regardless of industry or background, thinking in cost per use rather than sticker price alone at the moment of purchase. A well-made pair of shoes that genuinely lasts 5 years costs less, in every sense that actually matters over time, than 5 separate pairs that each fall apart within a year and need replacing on their own inconvenient, expensive schedule. Habit 14. I still mentor people when I'm asked, and I still ask for help myself when I actually need it, without quietly treating either one as some kind of weakness to hide from people who might think less of me for needing it. 73% of the self-made millionaires in Corley's study said they actively wanted to mentor others, specifically because they'd been mentored themselves at some point on the way up, often by someone who had very little obligation to bother helping them at all. Wealth built entirely alone, in isolation, rarely stays interesting or sustainable to maintain over decades of otherwise repetitive financial discipline. Wealth built alongside other people, with some genuine reciprocity built into the relationship, tends to come with an actual reason to keep showing up beyond the number itself, which matters more than it sounds like it should on paper. Habit 15. I still budget every single month, the same exact way I did when the numbers involved were much smaller and considerably scarier to look at. Not because I need to know whether I can technically afford groceries anymore, obviously, because the habit of assigning every dollar a specific job before it arrives is the actual underlying mechanism that built the wealth in the first place, not a phase you graduate out of once you've decided you have enough. 86% of millionaires in a Fidelity Investments survey describe themselves as disciplined and frugal, in the present tense, describing who they are right now, not who they used to be before things got easier. Here's the pattern underneath all 15, if you zoom out far enough to actually see it clearly. None of these habits describe what someone does specifically to become wealthy, as a means to an end they plan to abandon once they arrive. Every one of them describes what someone keeps doing after they already are wealthy, voluntarily, with no external pressure left requiring it. Which means the habits were never really about the destination in the first place, even though that's how they get marketed to people who haven't gotten there yet. They're simply how these specific people operate, day to day, and the wealth is closer to a side effect of the operating system than a finish line you cross and then retire from. I think this is where a lot of financial content quietly misleads people, myself included at various points along the way. It frames frugality and discipline as a temporary toll you pay to reach a better life on the other side, implying there's a version of made it, where you finally get to stop. But almost none of the actual data supports that story. The people who reach the number and keep it, rather than the people who reach it and lose it within a few years through lifestyle inflation and overconfidence, are overwhelmingly the ones who never treated the habits as temporary in the first place. I want to be honest about something else too. because it would be genuinely dishonest to leave it out of a video like this one. The average time to reach $1 million in net worth, according to Ramsey's research, is around 32 years. That's not a fast process. And nothing in this list of 15 habits is a shortcut disguised as a habit, no matter how satisfying a tighter, faster narrative might feel to promise. If you're doing the math right now and thinking that's a genuinely long time to wait for anything, you're right, and I'd rather tell you that plainly than sell you a faster story that doesn't hold up once you actually look at where it came from. What the research does suggest consistently across multiple independent studies using different methodologies is that consistency compounds in a way that short bursts of intensity simply don't. A Monte Carlo simulation using historical market returns found that investing roughly $580 a month into a Roth IRA consistently, without interruption, for 31 years, produces about a 90% probability of reaching millionaire status by the end of that period. Not by picking winning stocks ahead of everyone else, not by timing entries and exits with any particular skill, just by not stopping, month after month, through years that will inevitably include downturns that feel, at the time, like proof the whole plan is broken. I also want to name the version of this that doesn't apply evenly to everyone, because pretending otherwise would undercut the entire point of being data-driven in the first place. 32 years assumes a starting point with enough income to consistently invest something every single month, which isn't universal and isn't equally accessible depending on where someone starts. I'm not going to pretend a list of 15 habits erases the very real, well-documented gap between someone starting with room to spare in their budget and someone starting with none at all, some months, after covering the basics. What I can say, honestly, having looked at the actual data rather than just the inspirational version of it, is that every habit on this list costs nothing extra to practice, regardless of current income level, and every single one of them compounds faster the earlier it starts, which means the version of this list that matters most isn't really the one aimed at people who already have money to protect. It's the one aimed at whoever's willing to start the habit years before the number makes any of it feel real or worth the effort. If any of these 15 landed for you, you genuinely don't need to adopt all of them at once, and you definitely don't need $1 million first, or even 100,000, or even a positive net worth at all. Trying to install 15 new habits simultaneously is usually how people abandon all 15 within a month, discouraged by the sheer volume of change rather than by any single habit being too hard on its own. Pick one, just one, honestly chosen based on what feels most immediately doable, given where you actually are right now, not where you wish you were. If I had to rank them by actual impact relative to effort required, based purely on my own experience living with all 15 for years now, the automated investing habit and the 72-hour purchase rule are the two that do the most quiet work for the least ongoing willpower. Automation, because it removes the decision entirely, forever, the moment you set it up correctly. The 72-hour rule, because it catches the exact category of spending that does the most damage over time. Not the big, deliberate purchases you research for weeks, but the small, frequent, emotional ones that never individually feel like a big deal until you add up a year of them. Set one of them up this week. Not next month, not once your schedule calms down, not once you feel more ready in some vague sense that never quite arrives on its own. This week, this exact week, while the video is still fresh enough that you remember why it mattered. Let it run quietly in the background the same way it did for me, for years, long before there was any number attached to it worth mentioning to anyone, let alone filming a video about. I'll leave you with the thing that actually surprised me most, looking back at this entire list while sitting down to actually write this video, instead of just living it unconsciously. Not one of these 15 habits requires wealth as a prerequisite to begin practicing it. Every single one of them is available to someone with $10 in their checking account, exactly the same way it's available to someone with $1 million sitting comfortably across a few different accounts. The only real difference wealth makes, as far as I can tell from the inside of it, is that it stops requiring courage to keep going, because at some point the results start speaking for themselves loudly enough that the habit no longer needs willpower to sustain it month after month. Before that point, long before it just requires believing the data enough to start anyway, on an ordinary Tuesday, with no proof yet in your own life that it's actually going to work the way the research says it does for other people. If this was useful, subscribe. Every week, I break down exactly what the data says about how money actually works, in exact numbers, drawn from real studies and named sources, not vibes and not vague inspiration. So you can build the habits first and let the number catch up on its own honest schedule, however long that actually takes for you.